Okay. Yes, so thank you so much for this introduction. And I have to echo your thoughts about the way that almost every day something new is happening in the context of the COVID crisis. And it's quite a challenge, isn't it, to keep up with all the ups and downs during this experience. And what we know now is that this is probably going to be with us for some time. Exactly how long, no one is exactly sure. But it does take a different kind of leadership for the long term with crises. And I want to share some thoughts with you today about what that all involves. So it occurs to me that the crisis has hit us on all levels from a business perspective. On the one hand, we have our regional economic effects. I think we have now surpassed, of course, the number of illnesses and cases and deaths in the United States from other countries. And we know that this is having an extraordinary economic impact with unemployment. We have seen some reports that are projecting some recession. We may be seeing in the Washington area a bit more impact than in other areas. And I know that it must be affecting each and every one of you as part of the Board of Trade directly. We also see this on a human scale. When we step back and think more in terms of how is this impacting individuals, we know, of course, how it's impacting ourselves. Many of us now work from home. Many of us now work on a 24/7 work cycle, which we know is not sustainable and yet feels like the new norm. And this puts a new pressure on leadership. In some ways, we're facing a situation that none of us has faced before. And even if you have been in other crises and managed in tough times, it's not this particular time, which comes with its own different flavor, if you will. So we're managing in a different context of crisis. But for many of us, we're also managing a new context, which is a virtual context, work from home. Now, some of you may have already worked with global teams or worked with virtual sales forces, for example, but perhaps not on the kind of scale that we're seeing now. And whatever work from home looks like in your own house, you have to understand that now work from home is your business in terms of the people you lead. Back in the bricks and mortar age or world, it was sort of a distance that we would respect with one another about what would be relevant information for asking about work from home. And now in our all Zoom all the time era, we start to get a peek into people's personal lives. And sometimes it's all cute, where dogs come up and lick you during your meeting, or a cat walks across the desk while you're trying to talk. But for some people, and maybe even you, there are quite a number of challenges at home, bringing new meaning to work-life integration. I know that in my own instance, I also hold a joint appointment with the UVA School of Nursing, where I teach leadership. And I'm currently the interim director for the Compassionate Care Initiative there. And my assistant director and I have been on the phone and on Zoom and email almost constantly in the last couple of weeks. Well, I have to say that sometimes I find that I'm a little out of sync with what she needs. I live with a husband who's semi-retired. We don't have a lot of interruptions in our life. My assistant director has a 4-month-old at home. So it started occurring to me, oh, maybe I'm not hearing from her because she's nursing, or maybe she's not using her video during a meeting because she's nursing. So it's a new kind of consideration that we need to bring to our workplaces. And the big question for all of us is, how do we do this in a sustainable way when we know this is going to be ongoing for some period of time? And in some ways, the question isn't whether it's sustainable, but because of the length of time, we have to ask, how do we do this in a way that's resilient? Well, I want to share a little bit of information with you. First, about what high performance looks like, how it happens, and then talk about how mindful leadership and communication can be a supporting system for you as we go forward in the crisis. So when we think about the relationship between performance and the energy that we put into it, this is the fantasy slide. And you know this, that where sometimes it seems like if I just put more energy into something, I'll perform better, right? Well, wrong. This is actually from research that comes from the turn of the 20th century, and it's represented by the Yerkes-Dodson law. And in this graph, what we're seeing is that it's not the fantasy where the more energy I put out, the better I perform. Rather, I perform best when I am putting out a moderate amount of energy. So when I'm not using a lot of energy, I'm not getting up for performance. When I've expended myself in peak performance, I need some time for recovery. Now, here's another look at similar information. You can think about the relationship of resilience with performance as being related to effort and recovery over a period of time. So in this graph, the lines, horizontal lines are meant to represent time. And here we see that there is a zone of resilience in the middle where we're using moderate levels of energy, but that there are also zones that are hyperarousal. And you may have felt this in your own life. You may have seen it in some of your people. This is hypervigilance. It's overreactivity. It's anxiety on the border of panic. And in fact, in some work situations, it may actually be panic. On the other end, we have hypoarousal, where we are feeling sluggish. We're so fatigued. We're burned out. What we want to do during even normal and good times is to stay on the inside of that zone, neither too overexcited nor too underexcited or depleted. So this green line here shows the normal ups and downs that occur, let's say, over a period of time, whether it's a work day, a month, or a year. There are periods of time in which we expend energy, but then we also need recovery time. So the graph goes down. And when we get that recovery, we can then expend energy over and over again. Okay. Now, this is what it looks like to be what one of my colleagues, his toddler son, calls out of control. Like, Dad, I'm out of control. And this is when he's feeling really overstimulated, this graph. So in this graph, we see he goes from sort of a resting state all the way up into a very aroused, very excitable state. And he bounces back and forth until the end of the day comes and boom, crash. And then he's just flat out depleted, done. Okay. Now, as you look at this slide, you might say, that's not just a toddler. That might be some members of my team. Or you might even say, that might even be me. Well, suppose that this graph represented what was happening for you in your home life. And now let's add a couple of extra things on top. So in addition to what's happening in your home life, there's also the news of the day and and that could be represented, for example, by the yellow line, in which we get little news alerts throughout the day, and culminating in the 5 o'clock news or the 7 o'clock news, in which we hear about all the terrible things that happened, and then we spend the rest of the evening on the couch. Okay, and in the middle, in your green line, you're trying to work. You're trying to keep your head about you. You're trying to go through the day with all of these other competing energy systems going on at the same time. That makes for a pretty difficult work environment if that's what you're having to deal with. Now, some of us might recognize ourselves in this graph. You might even recognize how you have been behaving in the course of the crisis so far. I know in my own case, at first I was very like, let's get on it. We got to respond to this. And here at the University of Virginia, of course, that meant transforming all these classes, all our activities to an online system in about a week's time. But over a period of time, it's really hard to sustain that level of energy. And I found that after a week or two at that pace, I really started to drag. And I started to realize that I was getting irritable. I started realizing that I might not be paying attention to everything I really need to pay attention to as a leader in the context of this crisis. So it revealed to me that I had a blind spot. And what I want to share with you now is the kind of blind spots that can come up for people pretty much any time as a leader, but also especially in the context of a crisis. So here's some examples of ways that you need to understand your own reactivity. So some of us in everyday life or in the context of crisis might take leadership and communication for granted. There's no time for thinking about these things. We just do what we do because it's always worked for us and that's what we do. Some of us get caught up in the urgency and short-term thinking. And that starts showing up in our behavior and our communication at work. So for example, we might have a tendency to send emails at any time of day, expecting that somebody else is going to be on the other end responding just as urgently as we are feeling the need for a response. After a while, we start to feel fatigued from adapting so quickly and so frequently. Every single day, something new comes up, a new technology issue arises, a new problem comes up with a team member. We can also get limited by our egos and our mindsets and our biases. So sometimes as leaders, we put a trip on ourselves. We're like, I'm responsible. I have to be the person in charge. Well, you know what? Maybe you don't. Maybe you can share some of your vulnerability. Maybe you can share some of the responsibility. Maybe you can let other people help you because that's what people want to do in a crisis. That sort of human urge to help is something that we've seen in just incredible form in our lives these days, whether it's the compassion that healthcare workers show. I'm so moved by all the healthcare workers who've gone to New York, for example, to help with the crisis there. That's probably the most extreme example, but there could be smaller examples, quieter examples that are just taking the time to listen and to understand how somebody else is feeling in the context of all of this chaos and complexity. Sometimes we have a blind spot because we feel uncomfortable paying attention to or even speaking about emotions and values. And that's something maybe in good times you can have the stiff upper lip and you can avoid the softer skills, I guess if you could say. But in times like this, they're actually the harder skills. Finding the words, finding the feeling in yourself, even when you feel fatigued, to say how you're feeling, to ask how someone else is feeling, and to talk about the values that are going to help get you through the next little bit, the things that have always been part of the character of your company, the character of your team, possibly the character of our nation. Okay. It could be more comforting to you to focus on tasks than on relationships. Sometimes one of the things we do is we retreat from relationships into what feels like an analytical mode. We can usually only do that for a certain period of time before it catches up with us because we can be fooling ourselves, not only about how other people are feeling, but even about how we ourselves are feeling. And lastly, the biggest blind spot from a business perspective is missing the impact on your reputation. How you behave now, how you show up now, it will have a lasting impact on your reputation, both as an individual leader, but also as an organization or a company. And so people will have long memories of how you behave now. So a lot is at stake for all of us. So if you buy all of that I'm sharing with you, here's the thing that matters the most, I think, is that if there's no focus in you, it's hard for there to be focus in others. If you're rattled, if you're jumping at every little thing, if you're starting to respond to all kinds of emails and losing a sense of priority and perspective, you can bet that other people around you will too. So that's what's really at stake here, is getting a sense of your own perspective. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are lots of individual practices. Here are just a few that are detailed by my colleague, Rich Hernandez. He talks about exercising mindfulness, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Compartmentalizing your cognitive load. In the context of this crisis, I think what that really means is giving yourself downtime, having times when there is not work happening, focusing on one thing at a time, giving up the fantasy of multitasking, either for yourself or for your team. Taking a detachment break is a good one. We've fortunately been starting to have beautiful weather here in the Washington area. Getting outside instead of spending all day in front of the blue light of your computer screen can be a great way of just getting a bit of perspective and some fresh air. Developing some mental agility is a big one right now. And what we really mean here is being able to not only see what is and how we're responding to it in the moment, but have the wherewithal to reframe what's happening, to see it in a new light so that we can show up in a more resourceful way and also show the way for our team. And then lastly, there's cultivating compassion, which sounds very soft, but in a way it's just the goodwill that we want to extend to anyone we encounter. And this goodwill, of course, is also an accounting term. And it does help to add some value to the long-term value of yourself as your reputation and as well as your company. So let's go back to this mindfulness bit. What is that exactly? Well, mindfulness starts with a certain quality of attention. And that quality of attention is marked by paying attention in the present moment with an attitude of curiosity and goodwill. And this is much harder than it sounds, much harder than it sounds. It's hard to be in the present moment because our minds wander to fears and worry about the future. Our minds wander to remembering the past and how things were so great then, perhaps, or worrying about mistakes that we had made. So coming into the present moment means sort of bounding off those two different time periods and just being in the here and now. And that can actually be quite scary and require quite a lot of courage, because it requires commitment to decide, I want to see what really is right now. I don't want to see my illusions. I don't want to see my fear-tainted perceptions. I want to see what's actually right in front of me. And when I do that, I also want to bring a certain quality to that. And with that, a sense of curiosity, non-judgmental attitude, and even an attitude of goodwill can go a long way toward becoming able to accept what is, which is even harder. Just seeing it's one thing, but then accepting what is can be harder. And acceptance only means that, yes, this is happening. It doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean, gee, I'd like some more of this. It just means like, yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. And if this is true, then I might make a better choice because I can see it clearly. So the idea here with mindfulness is not only that you achieve this present state, but that with that present state, you can make better choices and perform better. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, you come in and look at your email in the morning and you have to decide which thing are you going to react to. Well, if you can take a moment to just come into the present moment, remember your priorities, notice how you feel pulled one way or the other to react to every single little thing, and instead come back to your priority. Now you're in a position to make a better choice. So instead of answering one email after another, you may search for the email that's the most important one, the most strategic value for the day, and answer that one and give your full attention to it. When you do that, you increase the likelihood that you can perform better. So that's how mindfulness works on a level of individual choice. But then what is mindful leadership, or leading mindfully, as I like to call it? That means improving the quality of collective attention to produce better results. Collective attention. As leader in your company, you have more power than others to decide what people pay attention to and to draw their attention to it and to hold them accountable for holding their attention to it. And this can be very, very challenging in a crisis when we're dealing with our own reactivity. We're dealing with the reactivity of people within our organization. We're dealing with the reactivity of people outside of the organization. This is tough. This is tough work. But I think when we apply it to crisis communication, we can develop a playbook that could be very valuable to you. And so let me share that with you now. So first thing to do is gather your own wits. Gather your own wits and center yourself and identify the priorities. Do this in the morning and then repeat multiple times throughout the day. As you do this, you'll continue to bring yourself back to a sense of focus. And when you have a sense of focus, you increase the likelihood that you can communicate that focus to other people. Especially early on in a crisis, but also ongoing in a crisis, gather as much accurate information as possible. And we know this is really difficult in times of crisis because speculation runs rampant. There are all different kinds of news coming in. It's difficult to sort through what's true, what's not true, but put a premium on most accurate information. And then talk to your people, however you define your people, whether your people is your team, whether your people is a division, your entire organization, customers, other stakeholders, but talk to them about what you do know when you know it. It's important to say what you know. These are the things we know at this time. Factual information helps to bring down the temperature during a crisis. You can also talk about what you don't know, and there's a lot that we don't know right now. Talking about what you don't know can be helpful because it helps to at least anchor worry, frustration, and the reactivity that many people may be feeling. Even better can be talking about how you're going to find out what you don't know. So you may not know the answer to all the questions at this point, but if you can talk about the plan you've put in place, the trusted team that you've gathered together to work on this problem, that can help to alleviate concern and worry that tends to erode our performance at work. I'd recommend that you consolidate information into a regular daily briefing or email. I know here at the University of Virginia, we have a hospital that is also attached to our university. And because of that, we tend to have a pretty strong emergency preparedness plan and emergency management plan. And what that looks like in our environment is that at the end of the day, someone is digesting information into a single email that gives some up-to-the-moment stats on the patient census, for example, how many masks there are, how many patients are currently in an inpatient basis, how many are on ventilators. That kind of information gives people a sense of progress. It helps them feel like they're part of the pulse. In your own organization, you can think about what would that look like. It could be, well, here are the contracts that are currently in play. Here are the contracts that are on hold. Here are the contracts that we have decided that we need to discontinue at this time. It could be that just kind of basic information that gives people a sense and a pulse of the business. In that email, you can also include information about support systems, things that might be available either through your employee assistance program or perhaps agencies in the local area, or perhaps support that's offered through your company's insurance. Combining this need for information with also need for support is essential in a crisis. This is important too, because we want you to show that your words match your actions. So it's one thing to express concern in the context of a crisis, but it's another to show it through a tangible action that gives that some meaning and some teeth. So here at the University of Virginia, for example, the provost has waived the requirement for tenure and the process that goes up, and has added another year to faculty members' tenure clock. So that means they get another year to come up for tenure. That's a way of acknowledging the extraordinary consequences of this move to online. It's a way of saying, look, we understand that performance goals are going to suffer in the short term. Here's a way that we're going to help you accommodate and alleviate some of the worry that may come up in a situation like this. It's important to show your humanity as well during your crisis. This is a time for talking about emotions. It's a time for talking about values. What are those things that bring us together as human beings in a work setting in this extraordinary environment? Talking about those things that you've experienced yourself, using yourself as a personal example, gives permission to other people to be vulnerable, to not know, to be confused at times, but also gives them ways to figure out how to overcome. So in that way, model what you want to see. Think about how much your behavior as a leader is telegraphing to people at this time. If you're emailing at all hours of the night, what is that telegraphing to people? What does it say about how you're responding to stress? What does it say about your expectations for them to be on the job 24/7? Is that what you really mean to communicate at this point in time? And then build in recovery time, not only for yourself, but for your team. So keeping things to the extent you can bounded within normal work hours, that goes a long way in an ongoing crisis. That means you have to really differentiate between what is truly urgent and an emergency and what just feels that way. Manage for tomorrow, incredibly important advice. All of our eyes right now are on the short term. How are we going to get through the next week? How are we going to get payroll done? How are we going to make sure that people are taken care of, whether it's employees or customers? But you also have to manage for tomorrow. And that's the trickiest part of all of this, because there's real economic concerns right now about how are we going to keep our businesses going. To the extent you can, describe a picture of the future, a time when you're going to be in a better state. I don't know if any of you have had the chance to see Queen Elizabeth's remarks to her country. But it was very moving to me when she talked about we will be able to see our friends again, our families again, we will meet again. Offering those kinds of words in times of stress like this, pointing to a picture of tomorrow in which things will be better, can go a long way to alleviating the worry and suffering that many will feel. And lastly, you've got to take care of yourself and others for the long haul. We are going to be in this for some time. Exactly how long, we don't know. We don't know exactly when we may be going back to work. We don't even know for sure whether this virus has peaked in the Washington area yet. But what we do know is that this is going to go on for some period of time. And even when we are, quote unquote, back to normal, there's going to be an aftermath to this. And through all of that, we're going to need to show up with a sense of presence, a sense of curiosity, a sense of goodwill, and a sense of compassion as we find our way forward. So with that, I want to pause and take some of your questions, see what might be on your mind. Perhaps some questions came up in the chat, and Naja, if you would share some of those questions with me, or if people want to open up their microphones and ask a question, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Sure, Lily. There's one question that came in through the conversation. Mondays are tough. I feel we're starting all over with managing people's space that they are in.
Mm.
Are there tools that we can use for a Monday morning, regardless of what day of the week is a Monday for us?
That's such a great question. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there are good techniques that you can practice on your own or even in a group. And actually brought along one of those techniques for you. Let me go ahead and shift forward into that. So oftentimes leading mindfully does come down to managing your own reactivity. And this is a technique that I wrote about a few years ago in Mindful Magazine that I call Arrive, Breathe, and Connect. And this technique is something that you can practice on your own, sort of, I would call it solo, outside of the fray. Maybe it's something you practice on a weekend or in the evening, but it can also be a really wonderful way to start your day. It can also be a way to begin a meeting. And arriving just simply means what we were talking about before, bounding off the future and bounding off the past and just coming into the present moment. When I'm thinking about all the emails I need to write, or when I'm full of regret because I didn't do something yesterday that I should have done or wanted to do, we're not in the present moment. And so for a moment, you just need to push the boundaries aside and just be in that present moment. And sometimes it helps to do things like get into a position where your body feels alert yet relaxed. And so some of you, if you want to try this along with me, just get into an alert yet relaxed position. And from here, you can just focus for a moment on your breathing and just noticing the inhalation and the exhalation can be a way of centering yourself. It can also give you some clues about how you're really feeling. So you may notice, for example, that your breath is rather shallow, that you're not breathing fully, in which case you can make a decision about whether you want to try to lengthen the inhalation or the exhalation. If you find that you're very panicked, if you're really worried, you can inhale for 1 count, exhale for 4. And then getting yourself into a more stable position, I'd ask you to connect. And you can connect to a number of different things. This is a very practical thing. You can really, if you're feeling quite stimulated, you might just connect to the solid surfaces that you're in contact with right now, your hands on a chair, your hands on the top of a table, your feet on the floor, your bum in the seat, and just feeling the support of that solid surface. You might connect to emotions that you're feeling in the moment, and they could be really anything. Could be excitement, it could be fear, could be concern, could be worry. Sometimes when you're feeling those things, it helps to dispel the charge of them if you can just say it quietly to yourself with this kind of language. There's concern here. Yes, there's worry here. Yes, there's fear. And then by saying that, you just sort of name what is and sit with that feeling for just a moment. And you might find that actually the emotion changes after a while and you go on to something else. And it's nice to understand that emotions come and go, thoughts come and go. It's not all static. And then you might connect to what it could be a generous interpretation. Perhaps there's been a coworker who's really on your last nerve. Can you just connect for a moment to a sense of generous interpretation, thinking about what must be going on for that person? Oh, if it was my assistant director, Hannah, she's at home with a 4-month-old. Her husband's out of work. He's been furloughed. She's bringing in the only income. Okay, if she doesn't answer my email within 10 minutes, I guess it's okay, right? You can also connect to values that are important to you, or connect to other things that provide you a sense of direction and purpose. So you can do this on your own, but you can also do this in a meeting. So in a meeting at the beginning of a Monday, you know, everybody come on into the room, and you know what, I really need your full attention right now. So let's just disconnect from everything else. Close your other windows, just put your phone down for a minute. Let's just be here for a moment together. And let's catch our breaths. You know, it's Monday morning, it feels like a lot of pressure, but we know what we're about. We know as a company that we have these things that we hold dear, and that this week is yet another opportunity to be our best selves. That kind of invitation brings people into the present moment and helps them get off on a good foot. So I hope those are some good ideas for you about techniques that you could use for yourself or perhaps as a team.
That's great. Thank you, Lili. We had another question come in. These are really disorienting times. How can you reset your true north? How do we reset priorities and stick to them when we're being pulled in so many directions?
Yeah, that is really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. I find that giving myself reminders, ways of remembering what my true north is, or if I've lost it, spending some time in some contemplative practice, whether it's reflective writing or doing things that help you feel like yourself again. Some people really enjoy getting out in nature. Some people love playing with their dog. Some just enjoy some physical movement that allows to discharge some of the, I don't know, interference or the junk that builds up in us throughout the day. But I think ask yourself, what's the one thing, or what are the three things I need to keep right in front of my nose today, or in front of my team today? If you can articulate those three things for yourself, do it multiple times a day. You can even set a timer and have a mindful reminder in which you just come back to, okay, what is it that I'm working on today? What is the priority today? So, because you're going to get pulled off. I mean, there's just no way you're not going to get pulled off. But if you have in place a practice for bringing yourself back to center, back to focus, back to purpose and priority, then you set yourself up for a greater success.
Thank you, Lili. Next question. How can you develop a sense of creating value when all the normal indicators are missing and you're not getting any feedback?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah, sometimes you just have to have faith in the value that you're providing. It's hard to operate in a vacuum when you feel like you're not sure whether what you're doing is working. Again, that's where these first principles or priorities help, both for you as a worker yourself, but as a leader, you can't possibly know what everybody is experiencing. So if you can be very clear about what the priorities are for today, what the priorities are for tomorrow, what the priorities are for the long term, you can give people in a way a benchmark or a ruler so they can know how they're doing on their own if you can't be there to provide that feedback. Okay, so I think an example of that might be to pick something that you know is attainable. I would pick something that is within most people's grasp. What we're struggling for right now is a sense of competence. We have sort of a desire to know that what I'm doing matters and is working. Pick something that in your environment makes sense for you. And it's hard to know without knowing your environment exactly how to advise you, but I would say that pick things that people know that they can accomplish, and then to the extent you can, check in with them. If you can't check in with them, ask them to check in with each other. That might be a time for some distributed leadership here. So if you're completely preoccupied with things that are going on at your level, can you deputize people? Can you ask people to share the leadership load with you? These might be some ideas for leading in these tough times.
Thanks, Lili. A few questions left before we close out.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for advising team members that tough decisions will likely be necessary without adding additional anxiety? How balance transparency with while giving hope?
Yeah, that's good. Well, for me, telling the truth in times like these is what matters the most. And the truth can be hard, but sometimes the truth is not nearly as bad as what people's fears are. And so I think being straight with people, being candid with them, and understanding what reactions might occur because of the truths that you have to share, and being attentive and attendant to those reactions is important. So it's a reality right now. Some of us, if you haven't already, will have to furlough or lay people off. That is incredibly difficult. I think most people are the type that want to look out for other people, and they know that there may be a very heavy consequence for making a decision like that. If you have to make a decision like that, do it with as much humanity as you can. People will understand. They won't necessarily like, but they will understand if you can give them reasons, if you can help them understand how you arrived at a decision and provide for their transition. Those things can go a long way. And it's important because you want to treat people who are departing the organization well, but it's also important for the people who are staying. They're watching how you handle the situation. And they're going to have their own emotions about this, the guilt that they were the ones who got to stay and others went. There's just so many emotional things to deal with. So start with the truth and then attend to the emotional reality. I think those would be the sound bites on that.
Thanks, Lili. One last question before we close out. Email is getting very overwhelming and losing effectiveness for internal communication.
Yeah.
Are there other recommendations for easing remote communication and increasing sense of transparency and connection among teams?
Yeah, that's email is getting overwhelming. I'll say that's true in my own life. So this is one of the reasons why I'm suggesting bundling and consolidating information. Unless people really need to know up to the minute information, if you can begin to do daily check-ins as opposed to just constantly bombarding people with new information, that can be a big help. It may be that you'll have to triage some situations, like what's really truly urgent, what can wait, what can be dropped. And you might want to also have some discussion about norms with each other. Some companies, even in good times, will say from this time to this time is an email free time. We're not going to engage in email from, let's say, 1 to 3 in the afternoon because we need to have concentrative time. Every single person needs that. Whole company blocks out 1 to 3 or whichever the right time period is for you. So each person can do their concentrated work, and then you can go back to the connected world. Others are using tools like Zoom or like Microsoft Teams or Slack to channel different kinds of communications to different types of platforms. What I would recommend is not letting it go on so long that you let a lot of frustration build up, but that you have norms discussions with teams. And in those norms discussions, be problem finding and problem solving oriented. So you're not only complaining about, oh my God, these emails, I'm just drowning in this, right? Quit sending me so many emails. But how can you say, all right, what's the real problem here? Is the real problem email, or is it the sense of uncertainty? And if it's a sense of uncertainty or a lack of information, are there other ways to solve this issue that may go well outside how you're handling email. So it may be that you need to have a daily stand-up meeting via Zoom so that you can alleviate the email trails that happen throughout the day. That way you're consolidating information, giving everyone a chance to work off the same set of information, and then pan out, go into their own directions and take care of whatever it is they need to take care of. So I hope these are some helpful things for you. I will share with you that this leading mindfully work is it's very relevant, I think, for times like these. And we were going to plan, or we had planned a program at the Darden School called Leading Mindfully that was supposed to take place in May. That is not happening now. And so we are on short order turning that into a virtual course. If some of you would like to join us for this course, we love it. It will occur over a 6-week period and meet roughly once a week online for 1.5 to 2 hours. And in between, there will be homework and other kinds of work for you to do, so you can begin learning the techniques of leading mindfully and incorporating them into real time in your own life. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And Lili, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I mean, it seems like it's been months, if not years, since we've all gone virtual. You know, the point about now we're working, you know, almost 24/7. So I definitely need to get more rest. So I'll work on that. As well as a number of other things. But what's been really fascinating to me is just how well folks are adapting. You know, there's a lot of hardship out there. We're going to have to deal with a lot of issues in the long term, but you know, people are really helping each other. They're being very creative. They're using their resources differently, you know, and, you know, I think that's what will help us get through this is really shifting and adapting to this new environment that we're all in. So this was really helpful to get some of these thoughts and your insights on this. And, you know, I recommend folks follow up with this and we practice some of the things that we learned here today. And so we very much appreciate you sharing with us. And, you know, as a reminder, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we're going to be talking about healthcare and our healthcare systems with McKinsey and Inova, which will be pretty interesting. And you'll find you'll find this on our website later this afternoon. So if you want to come back and take a look at it again. All right. So everybody stay safe. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.